Welcome to Suburban Death Metal Dad Bonus Tracks, Episode 29, Best of Horror, October Edition, Part 2. And in this one, I'm going to be giving a brief statement about 15 horror movies that I like. Starting things off with an older one from the 60s, and it's in black and white, but still a good one, called The Strangler. In this one, a seemingly mild-mannered lab technician is going around stalking and strangling women. All right, next on the list, a classic from the 80s that I remembered seeing the trailer on TV, and it scared me as a young kid. And anyway, it still holds up as a classic, talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street from Wes Craven. So if you don't know Freddy, this is a good introduction. All right, next up, another movie from the 80s, also from Wes Craven, Swamp Thing. And this one has good practical effects, and one of the highlights for me is when the villain, Arcane, takes the solution and turns into a creature. It's pretty memorable and creepy. This next one is from the 2000s, and it's one of my favorites in the series, and that's Alien vs. Predator. And I think I like this one a lot because it takes place in the Antarctic, and I'm always a big fan of horror movies that take place in cold and icy, isolated locations. So it's got aliens, it's got predators. I think it's a good one. All right, returning to the 80s, I saw this one when I was a kid, and maybe a little bit obscure, but I thought it was pretty decent. The Boogans. And this one is basically, there's a small town in Colorado with some mines, and there's one that's closed that gets reopened, and there's basically creatures in there that end up killing people because they're going into the mine. All right, the next one I'll recommend is a Japanese horror movie. I've got the whole series here, but I basically just want to recommend for this video the first one, the classic Ringu, also called The Ring. And this one is you watch a creepy video, and if you don't find someone else to watch the same video within 7 days, this disturbing and creepy girl crawls out of a well and comes through the TV and kills you. All right, this next one is from the 70s, and I first saw it like a few years ago. And it's really good, I think, and it's got William Shatner, and it's called The Devil's Reign. And in this one, there's a satanic cult, basically, and people's faces melt, and I think it looks really good. So if that sounds interesting, check that one out. All right, here I got one from the 90s called Fire in the Sky, and it's supposedly based on a true story of an alien abduction, and I think this one's done really well, regardless if you believe the story or not. All right, this one's from the 2000s, and it's kind of in the vein of Evil Dead. It's horror, but it's also funny, talking about Tucker and Dale versus Evil. So if you like the Evil Dead series or Army of Darkness, check this one out. All right, going back to the 80s for another classic, H.P. Lovecraft themed here with Reanimator. And I watched this one recently, and it still holds up. And yeah, H.P. Lovecraft inspired. Check this one out. All right, next one up is from the 70s, Count Dracula and His Seven Brides, also called The Satanic Rites of Dracula. It's got Christopher Lee as Dracula and Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. I think it's a good one. All right, another 80s classic one from Australia and famed director Peter Jackson, Bad Taste. And this one has over-the-top gore in it, a little bit of silliness, but yeah, it's very entertaining. All right, got another one from the 70s here, and it's basically like a live-action Scooby-Doo, in my opinion. Not super scary, good for the kids. Kiss meets the Phantom of the Park. So if you're a Kiss fan, I think it's a must, but even if you're not, I think it's still entertaining. All right, next up is one of my favorites, definitely towards the top of the list, talking about Creepshow, also from the 80s. Basically have 5 stories here from Stephen King and director George Romero. And 2 of my favorites on here are Something to Tide You Over and The Crate. But overall, they're all really good stories. All right, last on the list, one of my favorites, and talking about another 80s movie, The Fog from John Carpenter. And this one is one of my favorites, like I said, at the top of my list. And you have some lepers that, were basically screwed over by this town, Antonio Bay. And on the anniversary, they come back for revenge. Basically, these creepy looking undead lepers. And, it's a great story all the way through, in my opinion. And just by coincidence, the third movie that I mentioned in this episode with Adrienne Barbeau, she was also in Creepshow and Swamp Thing. And I also have something I picked up in Japan years ago, just for a few dollars. And it's The Fog on Laserdisc. And you can see also Jamie Lee Curtis. She's in the movie for a bit. So, yeah. I don't own a Laserdisc player, never had one, but I like this movie and I thought it was a cool thing to get. So, like I said, it was just for a few bucks used. All right, I also want to mention from the last video, someone did recommend a couple of horror movies, Midsummer and Hereditary, and I read up on them. They seem interesting, and I'm hoping I can check those out someday soon. So, all right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.